Hey there, my friend. Welcome to the Mentor Mom YouTube channel. I'm Jill and I'm the Mentor Mom. This week, I'm going to be talking about motor planning in play, as well as how motor planning can affect speech development. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so what is motor planning? Motor planning is the skill that allows us to remember how to perform steps to make a movement happen, and we use it every single day. It's really what happens before our motor movements. It's the messaging from our brain that tells our muscles how to act out these different movements. For example, walking up the steps or walking across a room. Now, something to know is that the human brain is only capable of doing one conscious task at a time. The brain can do a thinking task on top of an automatic task. So for us as grown-ups, walking has become an automatic task. We don't really think about it, right? So we can do other things while we're walking. Well, some of us. I still have to think a bit about it because I tend to be pretty clumsy. But an example would be walking while talking on the phone. You know, where our brain is focused on what we're doing on the phone, the automatic process of walking is just carrying us along. So the thing that's going on with our little ones, though, is that they have not automated those things like walking, climbing, crawling, all of that. So they're not able to do an automatic task with a conscious task yet, right? Everything that they're doing is a conscious task at this point. So that's why a lot of times with toddlers, we'll start to see a lull in their language development while they're working on a big task like walking. So they may be babbling and doing a lot of sounds and maybe even some imitation, but then as they start to walk, we a lot of times aren't hearing as many sounds or maybe as many words. And that's because they're working on the conscious task of walking, which doesn't allow them then to also work on the conscious task of talking. So that's why, like, when we're looking at different areas of development, that it's really important to, for example, have little ones have a lot of postural support while they're working on self-feeding. So, you know, you want your little one, if you're working on them, feeding themselves independently with their hands or using a spoon. That's going to be easier for them to do if you have them fully supported in a high chair, right? If they're kind of standing at the table and trying to self-feed, or maybe sitting in a chair that doesn't provide as much support and they're still working on postural control, it's going to be more difficult for them to work on this task of getting this food up here because they're still consciously working on figuring out where their body is in space in that chair. So that's why when we're doing assessments and looking at like fine motor tasks, which is a lot of times stacking blocks, we want to have the toddler sitting down on the floor or sitting with a lot of postural support while they're working on those tasks so that they can be more successful. So why is motor planning important? So simply put, if a child is struggling with the sequencing of motor actions, it can affect all sorts of things later on, like using scissors or writing and even speech. We don't often think of speech as being a motor skill, but it really is a very complex skill that requires a lot of sequencing from the brain. So to illustrate that, I want to have you do something rather silly. I want you to say the word cat out loud. I'm going to give you a second. Okay, so as you were doing that, did you think about how you had to move your tongue up to the back of your palate, exhale, and then move your tongue to the front of your mouth and put it on the top of your front teeth? Probably not. That's a pretty complex motor skill, right? So we have to be cognizant of that when we're wondering why our little ones aren't talking, if they're struggling maybe with or working on other kinds of motor skills. So let's talk a little bit about motor planning in play, because this is oftentimes where I first kind of notice these things with kids. So I want to share a little story of a little boy I worked with many, many years ago who was really bright, but really didn't have a lot of language. And his mom was really frustrated with his play because he was just dumping everything or putting everything in and out. And he had a sibling, and his sibling was showing more advanced play skills than him. And so as we were kind of watching and doing some play, we noticed that he was struggling to do things like we were having a little tea party, and we were feeding the bear with a spoon. And when he went to go try to feed the bear with a spoon, it was clear that he was struggling with that particular sequence. And so as he picked up the spoon and wanted to go feed the bear, the message from the brain to the muscles in the hands to execute that sequence just kind of went haywire, and it resulted in him just swiping the toys off of the table. Other times he would just throw things. That's why he was doing a lot of chucking. He knew what it was that he wanted to do, but it kind of went haywire when he went to execute it. Really, really frustrating for this little guy because he was super, super bright. And that's a similar thing that I see with kids with language if they're struggling with motor planning, that they're always bright and they know what they want to say, but this part just is not cooperating with them. And that can be really challenging and frustrating. So when we're looking at motor planning during play, some things that you might observe might be that your child maybe is a little clumsy. Or they easily get off task and move from one thing to the next. They are maybe slow at completing tasks. Maybe it takes them a really long time to feed themselves their meals. Or like the little guy I was talking about, they play with things in a really kind of repetitive way. They don't really kind of expand on that play. And from a speech standpoint, a lot of times little ones who are struggling with the motor planning part of speech have what we call a limited sound inventory. So they're not making a lot of sounds like other kids. They're not necessarily doing a lot of jargon, which is the ba 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 ba, where they're telling you a story and you understand it. A lot of times these little ones will have a specific sound that they use over and over. Maybe it's a eh. And that's pretty much how they work on communicating their wants and their needs. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do to help support your child if you think that they might be struggling with some motor planning. So if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I talk frequently about brain development and the importance of repetition with young children in learning. So when we're looking at motor planning, really, repetition in practice is the key. So if your child, and you're noticing your child is struggling with some of those different kinds of play activities, like for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was with a little boy who really, as I was watching him, couldn't stack Duplos. You could see that he wanted to do it, and he would go to execute it, but then he would just kind of set them down next to each other. So, and by the way, he also has an extremely limited sound inventory. So we're thinking that maybe we got a little bit of that motor planning stuff going on with him that's affecting his speech as well. But it first became obvious as we were watching him play. So working on different kinds of simple tasks, such as stacking some Duplos. So for this little guy that I was just mentioning, he was struggling with the stacking portion. So we did what we call physical prompts. So I was doing hand over hand with him, helping him to get those blocks on. And it was crazy because he would just smile. He was so excited that he was able to, with help, stack those blocks together. But doing that physical prompt hand over hand to help them be successful, and then gradually as their skills and that repetition helps them to build that neural pathway to complete that sequence, you pull your support back so they can start to do it more and more independently. The same would be true with like doing a puzzle. And when I say a puzzle, I'm talking about a really simple, maybe 3-piece puzzle with easy shapes to put in. Doing hand over hand with them to help them get those puzzle pieces in so they can have that success. Doing action songs, getting them imitating a variety of different actions with their hands and fingers. Using different instruments and using them bilaterally. Gross motor kinds of activities like climbing, crawling, running, jumping, hopping, wheelbarrow walks, animal walks, like walk like a bear, walk like a crab. All of those things are helping refine the motor movements and those neural pathways to successfully motor plan. I've had students in the past where they were struggling with like climbing up a small little slide, and so we would take and give them the physical support on 1 foot, 2 foot, 1 foot, 2 foot to help them with that motor planning part of even climbing up a slide. So give them some supports if they need it. Other great things are doing obstacle courses where they have to get down and crawl under something, they have to climb over something, maybe they have to slide under something. All of those things really help them to develop that motor planning over a variety of different kinds of activities and motions. So obstacle courses are great, like having them walk across maybe some pillows on the floor. Always keeping safety in mind if you think that they're ready for that. But that helps them have to figure out where their body is in space. So it really helps with that motor planning. And then any kind of activities where you're crossing midline. So if you're doing some songs, maybe we're going pop, 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 crossing midline, pop, 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 crossing midline, touching this ear, touching that ear, touching a shoulder, touching a knee. Crossing midline helps the two sides of the brain communicate with each other. And for kids who are struggling with sound production, you want to just practice lots of silly sounds during play and encourage them to imitate. We don't want to tell them to do it, but we're going to say, can you do this? So focusing on simple sounds like during bubble play, saying pop, pop, pop while pairing it with a motor action. Or as you're putting blocks or toys into a box or a basket, saying boom, pow, and bam, encouraging them, can you do it? So that they can just work on building the pattern of being able to just produce some of those sounds. Now, in the beginning, those sounds may not sound anything like the sound that you were doing. It may come out as a vowel sound, as they're tossing the blocks in. We want to say, great job, you're doing it, and let them know, I get that that's the best that you can do right now. It will eventually, with time and practice, lots of practice, eventually get closer and closer to those sounds. We really need to be super, super patient with kids if they're struggling with that motor planning part. It's a lot of work for them, and especially kids who are working on motor planning with sounds, because they know what they want to say and their little bodies just aren't cooperating, and it can get really frustrating. And if you pressure them too much, they're just going to shut down and walk away. So patience and understanding, right? Supporting them that way. And then also the repetition. So if you have concerns that your child might have some issues with motor planning and you want some support, talk to your pediatrician, reach out to an occupational therapist or a physical therapist for evaluation, or reach out to your local early intervention program. If your child is struggling with the sound production piece, contact a speech therapist in your area. I've put a link in the description below with information on how to access early intervention services in each state. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, make sure that you give me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you guys. So drop a comment below and let me know what your aha moments were or any questions that you might have. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll make sure that you'll get updates on any new videos coming your way sharing developmental nuggets. And then finally, if you have a question that you would like me to cover on my channel, I've also put a link down below on how you can contact me and send me your question. So as always, thanks for your support, and I will see you next time.